just the best songs. Southland's best music, 89.2 FOVO FM with Darren Ludlow. It's a song about one of our more famous Southland residents, Minnie Dean.
She dressed in black and she carried a hat in a hat box. When early to the station she came, and on her way back she'd always wear the hat in Chicago to Winton on the 5 o'clock train.
I've come here to the Winton Cemetery to visit a famous grave, which, despite its notoriety, is completely unmarked. No headstone, no inscription. It's the grave of Minnie Dean, the only woman ever to be hanged in New Zealand and known around here as the Southland baby farmer. According to the mythology that now surrounds the name of Minnie Dean, she was an evil monster who killed dozens of babies by stabbing them with a hatpin. She's buried 40 feet under the ground, and no grass will grow on her grave on account of the evil. Well, grass does grow on a grave. It's quite lush, in fact, which makes you wonder just what is the real story about Minnie Dean?
She was so sweet and gracious to the girls and the ladies, a home for the babies. She said
You can't go far in Southland without hearing about Minnie Dean. Her legend haunts the province, and Southland children are not threatened with the bogeyman, they are threatened with Minnie Dean.
She was the threat in childhood. She was the bogey woman who was going to get you when you didn't eat your dinner or you said no to your mother.
The horror stories she heard as a child inspired Southland artist Janice Gill to paint this series of pictures showing Minnie's life.
The theory was that she took babies in to care for them and killed them by using a hatpin through the fontanelle, the soft part of the baby's skull.
Now, the hat box is featuring there. Tell me about the hat box.
There were stories of her getting on the train with baby and hat box and getting off at the end of her journey with just the hat box, and the assumption is that the baby's inside. So in this picture, she is receiving the baby and payment from presumably grandfather.
So, around shortage of information about the real Minnie. The newspapers from the time are all here in the stack room of the Invercargill Library, and they're full of it. Minnie Dean's trial caused an uproar throughout the country in the early 1890s. The records show that Minnie's full name was Williamina McCulloch, and she was born in Scotland. It's thought Minnie emigrated to Tasmania before travelling to New Zealand. Bluff Harbour would have been her first sight of New Zealand. She arrived sometime in 1863. She stepped off the ship here, carrying her 2-year-old daughter Ellen in her arms and pregnant with another child. She told everyone her father was a minister in Scotland and that she'd married a local doctor and emigrated to Australia. When her husband died in Tasmania, she decided to move to New Zealand and live with an aunt. As a solo mother in the 19th century, Minnie's prospects don't look great, but she's determined to gain respectability and improve her lot. We don't know much about Minnie's life for the next 10 years, but we do know that in 1872 she married Charles Dean. He ran an inn at Eatle Creek, a small place on the route to the goldfields of central Otago. Married to Charles, Minnie's future looks secure, but their fortunes are about to see a terrible decline. First, the gold runs out and the business fails. Charles abandons the hotel and buys a farm, but it is a venture doomed to failure. The farm doesn't carry enough stock per acre to be viable. Then disaster strikes. Minnie's eldest daughter, Ellen, in a fit of depression, kills herself and her 2 children by throwing them into a well. The bad luck continues. 2 years later, Charles is declared bankrupt. Minnie and Charles are destitute. And it gets even worse. Charles owes an equally destitute ploughman £37. One night, on a drunken rampage, the man breaks into the Dean's bedroom and proceeds to demolish everything in the room. Minnie loses teeth in the attack. Minnie and Charles are desperate, so they borrow money from Minnie's aunt and move here to Winton. They bought 22 acres and a double-storied house just here. It was called the Larches, and the name is about the only thing that still exists. But the Deans' new start is again dogged by misfortune. Their new house burns down. Minnie struggles to keep up appearances. She moves into Winton and rents a large 7-bedroomed house, while Charles remains here at the Larches, building a 2-bedroomed cottage out of the remains of the old homestead. The Deans are desperate for money. Minnie decides to earn extra cash by taking in other people's children. It is a decision that is destined to end in tragedy and become the basis of the myth of the evil Minnie Dean. Stuck out in rural Southland, Minnie Dean and her husband have fallen on hard times. Having lost their house in a fire, they are struggling to make ends meet. Minnie desperately needs money, so she places this ad in the Southland Times. Wanted by a respectable married woman with no young children, a baby to nurse, or 1 or 2 children to bring up, or a baby to adopt. Thoroughly comfortable home in the country, terms very moderate. Apply by letter addressed BD, office of this paper. Minnie placed ads like this for a month, and pretty soon she was taking in children for money. Minnie and her hatbox became a familiar sight as she travelled all over Southland picking up foster children. The money helped, but it might have gone further. Minnie preferred to maintain appearances and always travelled first class. The options open to a decent woman to make a little extra cash in the 19th century were definitely limited. Taking in children, or baby farming as it was known, was a common practice in those days. Children were farmed out to people for lump sums or ongoing payment. Victorian attitudes and financial pressure made it difficult to survive as an unmarried mother in 19th century New Zealand. There was little hope of work and no welfare. While some tried abortion, the easiest and least risky option was to farm babies out. Minnie, like many other foster parents, was performing a social service taking children. But the extra money she earns isn't enough. The Deans can't meet the payments on the house they rent, and they're forced to move, babies and all, into the crowded 2-room cottage Charles built. Minnie Dean seems to be a woman of good character and upbringing, brought down in the world by a series of misfortunes. It would be easy to sympathize, except that, as I was soon to discover, the respectable background she presented to New Zealand society when she first arrived was all untrue. Lindley Hood is a Dunedin author who has written a biography of Minnie Dean. She discovered something surprising about Minnie's family background.
Well, it was all lies. She wasn't the daughter of a clergyman or the widow of a doctor. And I found no evidence that she was married to anyone before she married Charles Dean. It turned out that she was the unmarried daughter of a railway engine driver from Greenock, not from Edinburgh. She passed herself off as a widow because that's what anyone unmarried with children would want to do when they came to New Zealand. But she came here with her fantasies of a phantom first husband, who in fact was this man who lies here, John McCulloch, MD of Greenock, the son of her parish minister.
Well, isn't it pretty extraordinary that the man she makes up the story about is actually buried here? How did that come to happen?
It just happened because he developed tuberculosis and took the long sea voyage to New Zealand and died aboard ship at Port Chalmers in 1883.
Back at the Larches in a tiny cottage, Minnie continues to bring up other people's children. Conditions were incredibly cramped and money was tight. At one stage, there were 2 adults, 2 grown children, and 6 infants living in the cottage. But by all accounts, the children were well cared for. Then, in October 1889, a 6-month-old baby dies of convulsions after a 3-day illness. 18 months later, a 6-week-old infant dies of lung congestion. The police investigate. They demand to know who the parents of all the children are. Minnie reluctantly cooperates. There is an inquest. It exonerates Minnie and reports that the children at the Larches are well cared for, but that the premises are inadequate. Despite the verdict, the inquest provokes community outrage, which is inflamed by another death 6 weeks later. Minnie is linked in the public mind to baby farmers in Britain and Australia who have murdered children for money. There are no more deaths, but rumours abound of children disappearing. Minnie becomes the subject of intense police scrutiny. The police keep Minnie under surveillance. They believe that she's killing children by leaving them out in the cold at night, but they have no evidence. So they try to catch her out. They hide in the bushes until the lights go out, and then they sneak up on the house. But they find nothing. All the children are safe and sound, tucked up inside. Nevertheless, their concern remains. In 1893, Minnie takes a trip to Christchurch. The proprietor of the boarding house she is staying at becomes suspicious when she acquires a baby in the course of her stay. He calls the police. They remove the baby. The police report reads, "I believe this woman would have killed or abandoned this child before she got to Dunedin if it had not been taken from her." 6 months later, 4 children appear to be missing from the Larches. Again, the police investigate. Minnie claims they were adopted out. Nothing comes of it. Minnie continues to operate, but she becomes more furtive and starts using an assumed name to collect children. In 1893, the Infant Life Protection Act is passed. This means that unless you are registered, you cannot take in babies under 2 years of age. In Otago and Southland, 83 women register, but Minnie is not among them. She doesn't believe that the police would approve her registration, so she doesn't bother. Nevertheless, within 18 months, Minnie is advertising for children again. If she takes in a baby now, she will be breaking the new Infant Life Protection Law. The police are watching her. She continues regardless.
She dressed in black and she carried a hat in a hat box when early to the station she came.
This is the site of the old Gap Road railway station. The line used to run along here from Winton right through to Invercargill. On the 30th of April 1895, Minnie Dean boarded a train here for what would become a fateful journey. Minnie sets out to collect 2 children, but because they're both under 2, she is now breaking the new Infant Life Protection Act. Minnie takes the train to Bluff, where she collects 1-year-old Dorothy Carter. The baby cries constantly, so Minnie gives the child laudanum, an opium mixture commonly used to soothe fractious children. On her return to the Larches, Minnie gets off at Gap Road, a station early, and walks the rest. Winton Station is closer, but this way she can avoid being seen with the child. 2 days later, Minnie sets off on another journey. Carrying 1-year-old Dorothy and the hatbox, she is seen boarding the train to Lumsden. It is this journey that will become infamous. Minnie's actions on the train will form the basis of the court case against her. When Minnie gets off at Lumsden, she is carrying only the hatbox. During her stay there, 4 people will help her with the hatbox. All will later testify how heavy it felt. Minnie spends the night in Lumsden and then next day takes the train to Milburn. She's running short of money, so she transfers from first to second class. However, one station before Milburn, she changes back to first class, so she can arrive in style and make a good impression on her client, Jane Hornsby, who hands over £10 and 1-month-old baby Eva. During the journey, Minnie has been noticed by a railway clerk who has previously helped police keep an eye on her. He's suspicious and he contacts the police. At some point in the journey, the second child disappears. On her way home, Minnie gets as far as Mataura, where she stays the night. She leaves the train carrying only the hat box, which she deposits in the station. The next day, she reboards the train, carrying some fresh flowers. Minnie returns to the Larches on her own with the hat box and the flowers. Meanwhile, the police follow up the sharp-eyed railway clerk's suspicions and trace Mrs. Hornsby to see what has become of her child. They reach an inevitable conclusion. The police question Minnie, but she denies ever receiving the baby. But Mrs. Hornsby identifies her. And although there is no evidence that Eva is dead, the police begin to search the Larches. One of the policemen notices a suspicious flower bed and begins digging. The police uncover 2 little corpses, baby Eva and 1-year-old Dorothy. 3 days later, the police make a third gruesome discovery, the skeleton of a 4-year-old child. Minnie and Charles are both arrested, but Charles is soon discharged without a stain on his character, leaving Minnie to stand trial for the murder of Eva and Dorothy on her own. The trial is a sensation throughout the country. The police force Minnie to walk from the train station to the court. Along the route, she is jeered by the public. Her trial opens at the Invercargill Supreme Court on Tuesday, the 18th of June, 1895. Minnie is represented by Alfred Hanlon, a Dunedin barrister who will go on to become one of New Zealand's most distinguished lawyers. The case is not clear-cut. A central issue is what exactly happened to little Eva and Dorothy during that train journey. Forensic evidence revealed that Dorothy Carter had died of laudanum poisoning. The question was it deliberate? Although it was promoted as a teething remedy, laudanum is potentially a dangerous drug. Evidence was given that Minnie had not known that the laudanum she purchased at Bluff was much stronger than the stuff she had at home. So it is possible that she could have mistakenly given Dorothy an overdose. And as for baby Eva, Minnie claimed that the 1-month-old infant had fallen off the seat while she was arranging her clothes. However, medical evidence suggested the baby had been asphyxiated. Minnie's lawyer Hanlon argued that the deaths were accidental, that Minnie had no motive, that she'd been forced to bury the bodies because she was operating illegally. There was no evidence, he said, that the children were ever mistreated. In fact, the children found at the Larches at the time of her arrest were shown to be well cared for and happy. It's also clear that Minnie had not received payment for some of the children for years, but continued to care for them. And while children did die in her care, this was not necessarily suspicious. Infant mortality in New Zealand was very high in the 19th century. People flocked to the trial from miles around. They even started merchandising the event. Miniature hat boxes like these were sold outside the court as macabre souvenirs. Posters were printed depicting all the key characters from the event. In this environment, getting a fair trial would have been difficult enough, but the judge's direction made a finding that the children died accidentally almost impossible. In his summing up, Justice Joshua Williams declared, "A verdict of manslaughter would be a weak-kneed compromise." Throughout the trial, Minnie retains her composure. The jury retires, and within half an hour they reach a verdict: guilty. Minnie is sentenced to hang. Her appeal is rejected, and at 8 a.m. Monday the 12th of August 1895, Minnie Dean becomes the first and only woman ever hanged in New Zealand. Was Minnie Dean evil incarnate, or was she the victim of Victorian double standards? She certainly wasn't the mythical monster she's often made out to be today. There's no doubt she was kind and generous, and she looked after the children in her care long after she was receiving money for them. On the other hand, children in her care did die under suspicious circumstances. Maybe the only thing that is certain is what Minnie herself wrote from her prison cell. She wrote, "If I had never troubled with other people's children, I would not be where I am."